With all of the fantastic films Christopher Nolan has made over the years, the likes of the Dark Knight trilogy, Inception, Interstellar, Dunkirk, Oppenheimer, there's one film that consistently seems to be overlooked these days. A film I believe is possibly his best work, The Prestige from 2006, another Nolan puzzle box film. This one is based on the 1995 novel of the same name by Christopher Priest. Now, I'm not going to do a complete plot breakdown here. I'm going to explain the film's core premise and the secret of its twist and all of the various implications and theories that come out of that. So, spoilers ahead if you've never seen The Prestige. Please go ahead and watch the movie now and then come back to me here. So, based in the late 19th century, it's the story of two rival magicians, Robert Angier, played by Hugh Jackman, and Alfred Borden, played by Christian Bale. And they become obsessed with one-upping each other with respect to their stage illusions. In particular, a teleportation trick devised by Borden. He enters the door on one side of the stage and then appears immediately to exit another door on the opposite side. A trick so perfect that it drives Angier to considerable lengths to try to replicate it. Most of the film is told in flashback, as both men are reading each other's diaries and trying to get an insight into the other person's workings. But fundamentally, the film's ultimate twist and explanation is hinted at numerous times throughout the film. Michael Caine's character of John Cutter explains to the audience in voiceover the three parts of a magic trick. They're like three acts: the pledge, the turn, and the prestige. And he demonstrates this with a simple disappearing trick using a small bird. The bird is shown to the audience in the pledge, seemingly made to disappear during the turn and then brought back in the prestige. The grisly truth is in fact hidden from the audience. The first bird the audience sees is actually killed in the process of making it disappear. This gives the audience a key clue to the method that Angier uses to accomplish his very own transportation trick. Another key clue to the mystery of Angier's transportation trick is a moment earlier in the film where another magician makes a bird disappear, and a boy in the audience immediately figures out that the bird has been killed. Borden goes to the boy and tries to console him, showing him the new bird and claiming it's the original. But the boy knows better. He asks, "But where's his brother?" To which Borden says, "He's a sharp lad." Indeed, this is fundamentally another huge hint at how Borden does his trick, and I'd begun to suspect something about the character of Fallon as the film went on. He always seemed very quiet, on the fringes, and his appearance looked increasingly like some sort of costume, a disguise, basically. After Angier shoots Borden in one scene, blowing off two of his fingers, there's a scene sometime later where Sarah cannot understand why his wound is still bleeding after she had bandaged it up. This is, as we discover in the end, because Borden and Fallon had been sharing one life, each taking turns to pretend to be either Borden or Fallon at different times. Identical twins so dedicated to their work that one of them even had two of his fingers removed so that he would perfectly resemble his brother. This is also the reason why Sarah, Borden's wife, played by Rebecca Hall, had felt that on some days he loved her and some days he loved the magic. In reality, the magic had little to do with how he felt. One of the twins loved Sarah, the other loved his assistant, Olivia, played by Scarlett Johansson. There's another clue and foreshadowing in the film about the Borden-Fallon twist. An older magician who appears to be quite frail and has difficulty walking, he's able to perform a very elaborate trick that would require substantial physical strength and dexterity. And yet, he needs assistance getting in and out of a carriage. As Borden explains, this is the performance, this is the trick. He's pretending to be lame, pretending to be something he's not. That's why no one can figure out his method for doing the trick. Borden says that this is total devotion to his art, utter self-sacrifice. There's another clue about the Fallon-Borden twin revelation early in the film. Angier is reading Borden's diary and reads an entry from April 3rd, 1897, just a few days after Angier and Borden had just met. Borden writes, "We were two young men at the start of a great career, two young men devoted to an illusion, two young men who never intended to hurt anyone. Now, the audience is led to believe, because of the direction, that Borden is writing about himself and Angier, but he's not. He's writing about himself and his twin brother Fallon. There's no way that Borden would write something so personal about a man like Angier, who he had only met days before and didn't know well. Also a dead giveaway is the line, two young men devoted to an illusion, the illusion being the transported man illusion, their devotion requiring them to share one life. For the entirety of the film, we're aware that Borden is going to be hanged for the murder of Angier. Angier could never forgive Borden for the death of his wife, Julia, played by Piper Perabo. This happened during an onstage accident where she drowned in a water tank because she couldn't open the bonds that Borden had tied. And I think Angier wanted to exact a very specific form of revenge against Borden. Now, as we're aware, Angier went to see Nikola Tesla, who developed an incredible machine that literally duplicates things, including people. Nikola Tesla is played very well in this film by the late David Bowie. Now, this is how Angier was able to accomplish a perfect transported man trick, by duplicating himself every night. But the duplicate would fall through a trapdoor into a water tank and be drowned, allowing the other Angier to appear among the crowd as the Prestige. But there's a couple of questions that arise from this. Firstly, Angier was only led to Tesla by Borden. But when I first watched this, I figured that Borden had first gone to Tesla himself and made use of the duplication machine, producing Fallon as the duplicate. The two Bordens then decided to share a life together and make their transported man trick work. Angier then went to Tesla and had him construct a similar machine so that he could achieve his own similar trick. But in truth, Borden never went to Tesla. Borden and Fallon were actual twin brothers. Borden used the word Tesla as a red herring so that Borden could steal his audience and become famous. It's quite a coincidence, however, that Tesla would even have been capable of delivering the kind of machine Angier needed to accomplish his trick. The second question is, how did Angier decide to continuously kill his duplicates night after night rather than make one duplicate and perform the trick the way that Borden did? Well, put simply, this would require him to share a life with his duplicate in the way that Borden shared a life with Fallon. It was probably easier for Borden and Fallon to live this way, given that they were twin brothers. They'd known each other all their lives, and probably had to share pretty much everything they ever had. They did come from poverty, after all. Being an identical twin was already part of their identity, and this made them obviously extremely close. They would obviously have cared for each other all their lives. But to Angier, his duplicates would have felt like imposters, and potentially a threat to his very existence. Having to compromise his life so much by sharing a life with one of them, living in secret, having to pretend that two men were in fact one, that was a sacrifice he was unwilling to make. To him, there could only be one great Danton. So he continued to have his duplicates killed in the process of the trick each night, and probably expected that at one point Borden would take a look backstage and discover how the trick was done. Given the way in which each Angier copy was killed, drowning in a water tank, it meant that Angier could contrive to have Borden blamed for the death of one particular Angier duplicate, and in this respect, he could finally exact his revenge by having Borden framed and then hung. Now, on the subject of Angier drowning himself every night, when we see Angier use the duplication machine, we see that the original Angier remains inside the machine and the duplicate appears just across from him, a few feet away. This appears to be how the machine works. The original person steps into the machine and they remain there, and the duplicate appears some feet away from them. Now this means that the original Angier is probably long dead by the end of the film, because he would have stood in the duplication machine during the trick and then fallen through the trapdoor into the water tank and died there, while a new duplicate was created a few feet away to serve as the Prestige. So the original Angier died and the duplicate took his place. Then the duplicate would perform the same trick the next night, standing in the machine, falling into the tank and drowning, and another duplicate would be created, taking his place. This death and duplication process was repeated night after night over and over. Every duplicate would ultimately have to meet the same fate of drowning. Now, the reason I bring this up is because, to some degree, this horrific self-inflicted fate kind of makes Angier a tragic and almost sympathetic character. During Julia's funeral scene, Cutter tries to comfort him, explaining that drowning was a painless way to die. He relays a story of a sailor he knew who went overboard and almost drowned. He said it felt like going home, but of course Angier knows this isn't true, because he had tried to experience drowning for himself. In a scene before the funeral, Angier holds his head underwater in a sink for some time and learns pretty quickly how awful it is. He breaks down crying. He now understands just how much Julia would have suffered. At the end of the film, Cutter tells Angier that he was lying about the story. The sailor that almost drowned said it felt like agony. Angier knew that he would experience agony when he drowned every single night, and he likely accepted this for several reasons. Maybe his grief after Julia's death had made him cold, unable to feel anything, so he sought to punish himself. Maybe he felt extreme guilt or shame, not just for her death, but for killing all of the duplicates. In the end, there's also an element of thematic mirroring here. Just like the bird that dies in the cage and the bird that replaces it, this gives us the illusion that the same bird is being brought back to life. Well, in the end, one Borton twin is hung, only for another to reveal themselves as a new Borton, alive again at the end, almost giving us the impression that Borton has kind of cheated death, just like the bird in the cage. Almost like another magic trick. The Prestige is a phenomenal film, and one that's incredibly well written and directed. And it's the kind of movie that asks new questions after each viewing. There's many ways to interpret the events that are unfolding, but this is what I've come away with. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you haven't seen this movie in a while, it's well worth another watch. Take care, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.